October 6, 1973. The sun rises over the Sinai Peninsula, casting long shadows across sand that will soon run dark with diesel fuel and blood. Egyptian tank crews finish their morning tea inside T-55s and T-62s, the pride of the Soviet Union. Steel that has never lost to American armor, because American armor has never faced it in real combat. The crews laugh, smoke, check their ammunition. They've trained for this moment for 6 years, ever since the humiliation of 1967. This time will be different. The T-62 is the newest, deadliest tank in the world. Its 115mm smoothbore gun can punch through any Western tank at 2 kilometers. Soviet advisors have drilled this into every Egyptian commander. The Americans gave Israel their M60 Patton, but it's obsolete technology, a dinosaur with a rifled gun that can't match Soviet firepower. The math is simple. Soviet doctrine is proven. The Americans build cars and televisions. The Soviets build tanks that win wars. Commander Khalid Ibrahim sits in his T-62's turret, watching the morning light glint off the Suez Canal. His crew has painted kill rings on their barrel. Hypothetical, optimistic, but today they'll earn real ones. Intelligence reports say the Israelis have maybe 300 tanks spread across the entire Sinai. Egypt is crossing with over 1,000. The numbers don't just favor Egypt. They guarantee victory. The engine rumbles to life. Diesel smoke drifts across the assembly area where entire brigades of Soviet armor idle in formation. Ibrahim can see dozens of tanks from his position, and dozens more beyond those. The Israelis might have American steel, but they're outnumbered 3-1, 4-1 in some sectors. Soviet doctrine teaches that quantity has a quality all its own, and today Egypt has both. The radio crackles. First wave begins crossing. Ibrahim watches bridging units throw pontoons across the canal while engineers spray water cannons at the sand berms the Israelis built. The berms melt. The bridges deploy. The first T-55s roll across, their tracks clanking against metal decking. No resistance, no fire. The Israelis are sleeping or running or already dead. Ibrahim's battalion crosses at 8:20 hours. The Sinai spreads before them like an ocean of sand and rock, empty of everything except victory. Soviet trainers taught them to advance in waves, to overwhelm Israeli positions with firepower and numbers. The plan is perfect. The equipment is superior. The cause is just. His gunner, Ahmed, peers through the optical rangefinder at terrain features 2 kilometers ahead. Nothing moves. The desert holds its breath. Egyptian armor pours across the canal behind them. Hundreds of tanks, thousands of men, all driving east toward an enemy that should be panicking right now, calling Tel Aviv for reinforcements that won't arrive in time. Ibrahim lights a cigarette. The smoke tastes like confidence, like 6 years of waiting finally rewarded. His T-62 can kill at ranges the Americans never designed their tanks to fight at. The 150mm gun is a howitzer compared to whatever the Israelis are carrying. Soviet metallurgy is denser. Soviet armor is thicker. Soviet doctrine is smarter. The morning sun climbs higher. Heat shimmers rise from the sand. Ibrahim's driver navigates around a rocky outcrop, keeping formation with the tanks on either flank. The radio reports all crossings successful. No casualties, no contact. The Israelis are retreating or they're already gone. Across the dunes, American-built steel is waiting. The first Israeli M60 Patton appears at 2,400 meters, a dark shape hull down behind a ridge that shouldn't have concealed anything. Ibrahim's gunner sees it simultaneously with gunners and a dozen other T-62s. Soviet doctrine is clear. Engage immediately, overwhelm with volume of fire. Ahmed traverses the turret, centers the crosshairs, waits for the range data. The M60 fires first. The sound arrives before understanding. A crack that splits the morning air, followed by an impact 800 meters to Ibrahim's left. A T-55 erupts, its turret lifting 3 meters straight up before crashing back down onto burning hull. The crew never screams. There's no time. 1 second the tank exists. The next second, it's a funeral pyre. Ahmed fires. The 150 minigun roars. Recoil rocks the entire tank. The shell streaks toward the M60's position at 1,15 meters per second. Impact. Dust and smoke bloom across the Israeli tank's glacis plate. When the smoke clears, the M60 is still there, undamaged, already traversing toward a new target. "Hit them again!" Ibrahim screams into the intercom. His driver accelerates, trying to close the range where the T-62's gun should dominate. Another Egyptian tank fires. Another shell impacts the M60's armor and does nothing. The Israeli tank seems carved from something denser than steel, something Soviet metallurgy manuals never mentioned. The M60 fires again. A T-62 explodes 400 meters ahead, ammunition cooking off in a pillar of white flame. Ahmed's hands shake as he reloads, desperate to understand how a shell that should penetrate isn't penetrating. The rangefinder says 2,200 meters. Soviet training promised the T-62 controls everything beyond 2,000 meters. The Americans shouldn't even be able to see this far, let alone hit this accurately. 3 more M60s crest the ridge. They fire in sequence, methodical, unhurried, professional. 3 Egyptian tanks die in 6 seconds. Ibrahim's radio explodes with panicked voices, commanders demanding explanations, gunners reporting impossible misses, drivers screaming about tanks burning all around them. The Soviet advisors never described this. The training scenarios never included American tanks that shoot first, hit first, kill first, from ranges the T-62 was designed to own. Ahmed fires again. Miss. The M60 they're targeting sits motionless, a steel statue immune to everything Egypt throws at it. Ibrahim can see the Israeli tank's gun now, a long 105mm tube that shouldn't exist at this range with this accuracy. His own 150mm smoothbore, the weapon that was supposed to make him invincible, suddenly feels like a toy. The M60 traverses. The movement is smooth, controlled by systems Ibrahim's never seen. The gun barrel tracks left, stops, makes a micro-adjustment. Time stretches. Ibrahim realizes the barrel is pointing directly at him. He screams for the driver to reverse. The T-62 lurches backward. The M60 fires. The round misses by centimeters, passing through the space Ibrahim's tank occupied 1 second earlier. The shell hits a T-55 behind them. That crew has no warning. The penetrator punches through the turret ring, ignites the ammunition, turns 5 men into ash and shrapnel. Egyptian tanks are burning across a kilometer of desert. The advance has stopped. Commanders are shouting contradictory orders. Some tanks reverse, seeking cover that doesn't exist. Others push forward, trying to close the range where their guns might work. The M60s stay hull down, shooting, killing, reloading with machine precision. Ibrahim's hands grip the hatch rim. His knuckles are white. The cigarette taste from 20 minutes ago is gone, replaced by copper fear. The radio traffic from Egyptian crews shifts from confidence to confusion to screaming. By 1400 hours, Ibrahim's brigade has lost 47 tanks. Not to airstrikes, not to mines. To direct fire from American-built M60s that refuse to die, no matter how many times Egyptian gunners center their crosshairs and pull triggers. The Soviet doctrine manual sits in Ibrahim's map case, every page suddenly meaningless. The manual promised T-62 superiority at all ranges. The manual lied. Brigade Commander Colonel Mansour radios Cairo with casualty reports that military intelligence refuses to believe. "You're reporting 6-to-1 loss ratios?" the voice from Cairo demands. "Check your numbers. The Americans don't build tanks that shoot that accurately." Mansour stares at the burning wrecks scattered across his sector. The smoke columns write the truth in black letters against blue sky. The Americans do build tanks that shoot that accurately. Egyptian tank commanders huddled during a brief ceasefire, their vehicles pulled back into defilade positions that won't save them. Major Fuad, whose battalion crossed the canal with 32 T-55s, now commands 11. He chain smokes, hands trembling. "Their armor is too thick," he insists. "We're hitting them center mass and nothing penetrates." Another commander shakes his head. "It's the range. They're shooting from positions we can't reach. Our guns drop too much." Both theories are wrong, but they don't know that yet. Soviet advisors arrive by helicopter, demanding explanations in Russian filtered through Arabic translators. Captain Dmitry Volkov examines shell casings, measures impact craters on abandoned Egyptian tanks, interviews shaking crews. His report to Moscow will use careful language. American M60 performance exceeds intelligence estimates. What he means, but won't write: we fucked up. We built tanks for a war that doesn't exist anymore. The Egyptians try new tactics. They mass their T-62s in company-strength charges, hoping numbers will overwhelm the Israelis. The M60s switch to firing positions, relocate, fire again from new angles. Egyptian tanks advance into kill zones that have been pre-ranged, pre-sighted, already registered by Israeli gunners who treat long-range gunnery like a science the Soviets never mastered. One Egyptian charge gets within 100-200 meters before 8 tanks explode in 30 seconds. The survivors retreat through smoke that smells like burning rubber and cooked ammunition. Crews bail out, running through sand rather than staying inside steel coffins that attract 105mm rounds like magnets. Ibrahim's gunner, Ahmed, hasn't fired in 3 hours. Their T-62 sits behind a rocky outcrop, engine idling, while the crew debates whether advancing means dying or retreating means cowardice. The debate ends when an M60 round hits the rocks above them, showering the turret with stone fragments. They reverse at full speed, tracks throwing sand, radio silent, because speaking might draw attention. Cairo demands updates. Field commanders lie, reducing their casualty numbers by half, because reporting the truth means admitting Soviet equipment failed, Soviet training failed, Soviet promises about American inferiority were fantasy. The lies compound. Higher headquarters builds battle plans using fictional tank counts. Reinforcements deploy into sectors that are already graveyards. By nightfall, Egyptian tank battalions that cross the canal with 60 vehicles report combat strength of 20, 15, 8. Maintenance crews work through darkness, trying to repair tanks damaged by near misses and ricochets. Welders fix track links. Mechanics bleed hydraulics. Nobody can fix the fundamental problem. American tanks see farther, shoot farther, kill farther than anything Soviet designers imagined possible. Ibrahim sleeps inside his T-62, dreams about turrets flying through the air. He wakes at Oro 300 to radio traffic, reporting more Israeli M60s moving into blocking positions. Dawn is 4 hours away. The sun will rise on Egyptian armor that's already beaten. They just don't have permission to admit it yet. In Moscow, Soviet advisors receive the first panicked cables and refuse to believe them. The M60 Pattons' main gun is British. This fact alone dismantles Soviet assumptions about American tank design. The Royal Ordnance L7 100mm rifled gun, developed at Britain's Fighting Vehicle Research Establishment in the 1950s, fires ammunition the Soviets spent a decade underestimating. The rifled barrel spins the projectile at 300 rotations per second, stabilizing flight over distances. Soviet smoothbore guns can't match with precision, but the shell itself is the revelation. The M735 armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot round uses a tungsten penetrator, a dart of ultra-dense metal encased in an aluminum sabot that falls away after leaving the barrel. The penetrator flies at 1,500 meters per second, retaining velocity and accuracy at ranges where Soviet steel core ammunition tumbles and loses energy. When it hits T-62 armor at 2,000 meters, the tungsten doesn't mushroom or shatter. It pierces, clean, through. Egyptian crews firing back with 150-meter smoothbore guns are shooting technology from 1961. The ammunition, APF's DS rounds the Soviets considered cutting edge, uses steel penetrators that work beautifully at 1,500 meters. Beyond that range, they bleed velocity, drop trajectory, lose the kinetic energy needed to defeat composite armor. The T-62 was designed for close-range brawls in European forests. The Sinai offers no forests, no cover, just open desert where American optics and British guns rewrite the rules of tank warfare. The M60's armor tells the second half of the story. The glacis plate uses spaced composite arrays, steel plates sandwiched with air gaps and specialized materials that dissipate kinetic energy. When Egyptian shells impact at oblique angles, the composite forces the penetrator to tunnel through multiple layers, each one bleeding more energy until the dart stops inside the armor, instead of punching through to the crew compartment. Soviet intelligence photographs of M60s never revealed this. The armor looks homogeneous from outside, thick but conventional. The internal structure, the spaces, the angles, the material science, remains invisible until Egyptian penetrators hit and fail, and crews scream into radios about shells that should have killed but didn't. The fire control system completes the triangle of superiority. The M60A1 stereoscopic rangefinder uses two optical paths separated by a meter-wide baseline, creating parallax that allows the gunner to calculate exact range with mechanical precision. Soviet rangefinders use single-path optics that require the gunner to estimate range by comparing target size to reticle markings, guesswork disguised as science. Israeli gunners train thousands of hours on the stereoscopic system. They range targets at 2,500 meters within 5-meter accuracy. Egyptian gunners estimate range using experience and hope, their calculations off by 100 meters, 200 meters, enough error to miss entirely or hit armor at angles that won't penetrate. The gun stabilization system, hydraulic technology the Soviets considered unnecessary, allows M60 gunners to fire accurately while moving at 30 kilometers per hour across uneven terrain. The gyroscopes and servo motors keep the gun barrel locked on target even when the hull pitches and rocks over desert dunes. Egyptian T-62s must stop to shoot accurately. Stop, acquire, range, fire. Each pause makes them targets. Each moment of stillness invites 105mm tungsten to find them. The Americans didn't build a better tank through single innovation. They built a system, gun plus ammunition plus armor plus optics plus stabilization, that functions as integrated technology rather than separate components. The Soviets optimized individual elements. The Americans optimized the relationship between elements. Egyptian tank commanders don't understand systems engineering. They understand their shells bounce and American shells penetrate, and the math doesn't work anymore. But the gun is only half the answer. The real secret is what Egyptian crews never see. The M60's real advantage lives inside the turret, invisible to every Egyptian crew that dies without understanding why. The ballistic computer, a mechanical marvel of cams, gears, and analog circuits, solves equations. Soviet gunners calculate manually. Range to target, crosswind speed, barrel wear, ammunition temperature, vehicle cant angle. The computer integrates 17 variables in 3 seconds, automatically adjusting the gun's elevation and lead angle for a first-round hit. Egyptian gunners use printed range tables and mental arithmetic. If the target is 2,000 meters away and wind is blowing left to right at 15 kilometers per hour and the tank is tilted 4 degrees uphill, the gunner flips through laminated cards, estimates corrections, applies Kentucky windage, and prays. The M60 gunner turns a dial, looks through the sight, and squeezes the trigger. Mathematics defeats hope every single time. The optical quality gap is even more devastating. Israeli M60s use Zeiss optics, West German glass ground to tolerances measured in fractions of microns. At 2,500 meters, an Israeli gunner can distinguish between a T-55 and a T-62 by counting the road wheels. Egyptian gunners peer through Soviet optics that blur beyond 1,800 meters, turning distant targets into dark blobs that might be tanks, or might be rocks, or might be burning wrecks. Major Hassan discovers this during a firefight on October 9th. His T-62 stalks an M60 at what his rangefinder estimates as 1,600 meters, close enough for a kill shot. He fires, misses. The M60 doesn't return fire. Hassan orders his driver forward, closing the range to 1,400 meters. He fires again. Another miss. The Israeli tank still doesn't shoot back, just sits there like a target on a gunnery range. Hassan's gunner rechecks the range. The stereoscopic sight shows 2,100 meters, not 1,600. The Soviet rangefinder's single-path optics created a 500-meter error. Every shot Hassan fired dropped short, kicking up sand 400 meters in front of the Israeli position. The M60 never returned fire because Hassan was never a threat, just an amateur revealing his position. The M60 fires. Hassan's T-62 explodes. He survives only because he was standing in the commander's hatch, blown clear by the ammunition detonation that vaporizes his crew. The gun stabilization system enables something Egyptian doctrine considers impossible: firing accurately while moving at combat speed. Soviet tanks must stop to shoot. The gun barrel whips and bounces during movement, destroying any chance of hitting targets beyond point-blank range. Israeli M60s advance at 30 kilometers per hour. Their stabilized guns tracking smoothly across terrain that would make T-62 barrels dance like compass needles. Egyptian crews watch Israeli tanks fire on the move and assume they're witnessing desperation. Wild shooting that wastes ammunition. Then their own tanks explode from hits they never saw coming, fired from platforms that shouldn't have been able to aim, let alone kill. The Americans developed this technology for different terrain, European hills and German forests, but it translates perfectly to desert warfare. Rolling dunes that force Egyptian tanks to crest ridges, exposed silhouettes then stop to acquire targets become shooting galleries for M60s that fire from reverse slopes while moving, their stabilized guns compensating for every bump and tilt. By day 3, Egyptian tank battalions abandon Soviet doctrine entirely. They hunt for cover instead of prey, wadis, depressions, anything that blocks line of sight to the American optics and British guns. They dig in, hide, wait for nightfall when superior technology means less. But the Israelis have thermal sights arriving by airlift from the United States. Darkness won't save anyone. By day 3, Egyptian tank battalions are hunting for cover instead of prey. The final accounting tells a story Soviet armor doctrine never prepared for. In the Sinai, Israeli M60 Pattons destroy Egyptian T-55s and T-62s at ratios that defy everything Moscow taught about modern tank warfare. Individual engagements report 8-to-1 kill ratios. Battalion-level actions reach 6-to-1. Across the entire southern front, every M60 loss costs Egypt 5 tanks, 6 tanks, sometimes more. The 190th Armored Brigade records the most lopsided numbers. 41 M60s engaged 96 Egyptian T-62s near the Mitla Pass on October 14th. When the smoke clears 4 hours later, 73 T-62s burn across 12 square kilometers of desert. The Israelis lose 7 tanks, 5 to mechanical breakdown, 2 to hits that penetrate. The mathematics are obscene. The advantage isn't marginal, it's systematic. Colonel David Yisraeli commands an M60 company on the Golan Heights where Syrian T-62s attack in waves that should overwhelm his 22 tanks through pure mass. The Syrians commit 180 tanks to the assault. Yisraeli's company destroys 61 before Syrian commanders order retreat. His gunners averaged 2.8 kills per tank. Soviet doctrine predicted the exact opposite outcome: numerical superiority winning through attrition. American technology inverts the equation. Egyptian prisoner interrogations reveal the psychological dimensions statistics can't capture. Tank commander after tank commander describes the same progression. Confidence during approach, confusion at first misses, panic when American tanks won't die, terror when their own tanks start exploding from ranges they can't return fire at. Captured crews report abandoning functional tanks because staying inside means dying inside. Captain Samir, pulled from a burning T-55 near Ismailia, describes watching his entire platoon die in 90 seconds. "We couldn't see them clearly," he tells Israeli interrogators. "Just shapes on the horizon. We fired. Nothing happened. Then my friends exploded one after another. Fast. Like someone flipping light switches." His hands shake, holding the cigarette Israeli intelligence offers. "Your tanks are from the future." The Americans aren't from the future. They're from 1960s Detroit and British research labs. But the technological gap feels supernatural to crews trained on Soviet equipment. The M60's integrated systems, gun, optics, armor, stabilization, fire control, create combat effectiveness that exceeds the sum of components. Egyptian tanks carry individual technologies that work in isolation, but fail when combined against an enemy who engineered holistic solutions. Soviet analysts reviewing battlefield reports refuse initial conclusions. The numbers seem impossible. General Sergei Maestrenko demands physical evidence: captured M60s, recovered ammunition, anything proving these performance claims. Israeli tanks rarely penetrate deep enough to be captured. The few M60s Egypt recovers are immediately shipped to Moscow in sealed containers, treated like archaeological artifacts from an advanced civilization. The kill ratios force doctrinal reassessment across the entire Warsaw Pact. If American tanks achieve 6-to-1 advantages against Soviet equipment in actual combat, then every war game, every defensive plan, every armor concentration on the European frontier uses wrong assumptions. The numbers from Sinai and Golan suggest NATO armor could achieve local superiority even when outnumbered, exactly the scenario Soviet planning deemed impossible. Egyptian commanders write after-action reports in language that avoids blame while admitting catastrophe. Enemy tank performance exceeded intelligence assessments. American optical systems demonstrated unexpected capability. Recommended immediate modernization of fire control apparatus. Between the diplomatic phrasing lies the truth. We got slaughtered by technology we didn't know existed. The wrecks accumulate. The statistics compound. The advantage becomes undeniable. Captured Egyptian tank commanders describe what it felt like to die inside Soviet confidence. The Sinai Peninsula becomes an exhibition of Soviet failure stretched across 400 kilometers of sand. Egyptian T-55s and T-62s sit where they died. Some burned to skeletal frames, others intact but abandoned when crews fled rather than face another 105mm tungsten penetrator. Israeli reconnaissance photographs the carnage for intelligence assessment. The images show tank graveyards organized in neat rows where Egyptian formations advanced, then stopped, then burned. Near the Mitla Pass, 73 T-62s create a semicircle of wreckage 2 kilometers wide. The positioning tells the tactical story. Egyptian armor advancing in textbook Soviet wedge formation, confident in doctrine that promised firepower and mass would overwhelm defense. The M60s engaged from hull-down positions the Egyptians never identified until shells started penetrating turrets. The T-62s tried to retreat, some reversing, others pivoting to escape. None made it. The wrecks face random directions, frozen mid-panic, their final moments written in track marks and burn patterns. The Egyptian 25th Armored Brigade ceases to exist as a fighting force on October 14th. Of 96 tanks that cross the canal, 11 return. The rest decorate the landscape between Ismailia and the Gidi Pass, some destroyed by direct fire, others abandoned when ammunition depleted and retreat seemed wiser than dying for doctrine. Israeli salvage crews count turrets blown completely off hulls, a signature of ammunition cooking off when penetrators find the stored rounds. 27 tanks died this way, their turrets resting upside down 10 meters from burning chassis. Soviet military attachés demand access to the battlefields. Egyptian commanders initially refuse. The wreckage is too embarrassing, too comprehensive, too obvious. Moscow insists. The attachés arrive with cameras, measuring tools, metal analysis kits. They photograph penetration holes, measure entry angles, collect armor samples sheared by tungsten darts, traveling at velocities Soviet metallurgy never anticipated. Colonel Dmitry Volkov walks through a field of destroyed T-55s near Bir Gifgafa. Every tank shows the same wound pattern. Small entry hole on the turret front or glacis plate. Massive exit hole on the rear where the penetrator punched through after destroying everything inside. Volkov measures the entry holes, 86 millimeters, 91 millimeters, consistent with 105-meter APF SDS rounds. The Soviet intelligence assessment that dismissed American fin-stabilized ammunition as inferior lies in ruins like the tanks around him. The wreckage gets cataloged, photographed, shipped to Moscow in cargo planes that ferry home evidence of doctrinal failure. Soviet engineers disassemble T-62 turrets in laboratories, mapping the damage paths, calculating impact velocities, reverse engineering the American ammunition that shouldn't have worked this well. The analysis confirms what battlefield commanders already reported. Soviet armor is obsolete against American technology they underestimated by a decade. Egyptian salvage efforts focus on recovering anything functional. Mechanics strip optics, radios, engines from wrecks that structural damage makes unfixable. The work proceeds slowly because more tanks lie destroyed than Egypt has salvage crews. Some wrecks sit untouched for weeks, gradually buried by sand that covers evidence of the largest tank battle since Kursk. The Golan Heights tells the same story in different terrain. Syrian T-62s cluster in valleys where they sought cover from Israeli guns that found them anyway. The wrecks create navigation hazards for months, obstacles Israeli engineers eventually bulldoze into mass graves of Soviet steel. Nobody counts the exact numbers. The estimates range from 600 to 800 destroyed Syrian tanks. The precision doesn't matter. The scale speaks clearly enough. The photographs reach Cairo, Damascus, Moscow. Military journals publish sanitized versions that avoid showing the complete devastation. The full images stay classified, too damaging to Soviet prestige, too accurate about American capability. Soviet engineers demand the wreckage be returned to Moscow for analysis, desperate to understand how their superior tanks failed so completely. The T-72 arrives in 1974, 18 months ahead of schedule. Soviet designers accelerate development specifically to address the lessons Egyptian tanks burned to teach. The new tank features composite armor arrays copied from Western concepts, improved fire control systems, and ammunition designed to penetrate the armor that stopped T-62 shells cold. The entire design philosophy shifts from good enough to overwhelm NATO through numbers to good enough to survive American technology. In Nizhny Tagil, engineers at Uralvagonzavod tear apart the recovered M60 components like archaeologists examining alien artifacts. The ballistic computer's CAM mechanism gets reverse engineered, its 17 variable calculations mapped onto Soviet equivalents. The composite armor gets sectioned, analyzed under electron microscopes, its energy dissipation properties translated into new laminate designs. Soviet metallurgists developed their own tungsten penetrators after realizing steel core ammunition is obsolete. The T-80 program receives emergency funding. The gas turbine engine, previously considered too expensive for mass production, suddenly becomes essential for matching the M60's mobility and power-to-weight ratio. Soviet armor doctrine evolves from tanks fight at close range in coordinated waves to tanks must engage effectively beyond 2,000 meters or die. Every assumption about modern tank warfare gets reassessed through the lens of what happened when Soviet confidence met American engineering. Training programs change across the entire Warsaw Pact. Gunners drill on long-range engagement scenarios that pre-1973 doctrine considered wasteful. Range-finding exercises emphasize precision over volume of fire. Tank commanders study after-action reports from Sinai and Golan like religious texts, learning where Soviet tactics failed, where American systems dominated, where the gap between theory and reality proved fatal. The strategic implications cascade beyond tank design. Soviet military planners recalculate force requirements for European operations. If NATO tanks achieve 6-to-1 kill ratios, the Sinai average, then Soviet numerical superiority in Central Europe disappears. The 3-to-1 tank advantage the Warsaw Pact maintained suddenly becomes inadequate. Every operational plan, every logistics calculation, every mobilization timeline gets revised upward. More tanks, better tanks, faster deployment. The technological race accelerates. Moscow pours funding into armor research, fire control development, ammunition advancement. The Americans demonstrated that integrated systems defeat superior individual components. The Soviets respond by attempting to build their own integrated systems, reverse engineering the holistic approach that made the M60 dominant. But reverse engineering takes time. The T-72 enters service carrying improvements, but it's evolutionary, not revolutionary. The Americans maintained their technological edge through the 1970s, while Soviet designers scrambled to close gaps they didn't know existed, until Egyptian crews reported shells bouncing off targets that shouldn't survive. The doctrinal earthquake reaches beyond hardware. Soviet military academies teach new curricula emphasizing technological parity over numerical superiority. The old lesson, quantity has a quality all its own, gets amended with uncomfortable truth. Only when the quality gap isn't measured in decades. When one side sees farther, shoots farther, and kills farther, numbers stop mattering at the tactical level. Egyptian officers attend Soviet armor schools after the war, sharing first-hand testimony about fighting American technology with Soviet equipment. Their accounts influence an entire generation of Warsaw Pact tankers who learned that doctrine written in Moscow might fail when tested against engineering developed in Detroit and Britain. The psychological impact, confidence transformed into doubt, reshapes Soviet military culture as thoroughly as the T-72 reshaped Soviet tank design. The 1973 war forces a fundamental reassessment that accelerates programs, redirects funding, and rewrites doctrine. The M60 didn't just destroy Egyptian tanks. It destroyed Soviet assumptions about technological superiority. But the real consequence plays out in presidential palaces from Cairo to Damascus. Anwar Sadat sits in his Cairo office in November 1977, 4 years after watching Soviet tanks burn across the Sinai. The decision he's about to announce will shock the Arab world, fracture the Soviet-Egyptian alliance that lasted 2 decades, and redraw the Cold War map of the Middle East. He's flying to Jerusalem, to meet with Israelis, to pursue peace with the enemy that humiliated Egyptian armor so completely that continuing war seems like suicide. The battlefield mathematics drove this moment. Egypt cannot win a conventional war against American technology. The 1973 war proved this in the most expensive way possible. Hundreds of tanks destroyed, thousands of soldiers killed, an entire Soviet-equipped military outclassed by Western systems. Sadat understands what Moscow refuses to admit. The gap isn't closing. American tanks, American aircraft, American missiles represent a technological generation. Soviet industry cannot match in time frames that matter. So Sadat pivots. If Egypt cannot defeat American weapons, Egypt will acquire American weapons. The logic is brutal and simple. Soviet equipment lost. American equipment won. Alliance with Moscow brings obsolete tanks and empty prestige. Alliance with Washington brings M60s, F-16s, and the technological edge that determines who lives and who burns. The Soviet response is immediate and furious. Moscow cuts military aid, recalls advisors, cancels grain shipments. The Kremlin treats Sadat's peace initiative as betrayal, abandonment, strategic disaster. Soviet diplomats call it surrender to imperialism. What they mean but won't say, Egypt is choosing the side with better tanks. The Camp David Accords in 1978 formalize what the battlefield established. Egypt recognizes Israel, receives the Sinai Peninsula back, and, critically, gains access to American military technology. The first M60 Pattons arrive in Egypt in 1980, replacing the Soviet tanks that failed so completely. Egyptian tank crews train on the same systems that killed their predecessors, learning the stereoscopic rangefinders, ballistic computers, and stabilization systems that made the difference between hunting and dying. Syria watches Egypt's defection and doubles down on Soviet alliance, a decision that locks Damascus into technological disadvantage for decades. Syrian T-72s will face Israeli M60s upgraded with reactive armor, thermal sights, and improved ammunition. The kill ratios won't improve. The lesson Egypt learned through catastrophic losses, Syria chooses to ignore. The strategic earthquake ripples through the Middle East. Egypt, the largest Arab nation, the military power that fought Israel 4 times, abandons the Soviet sphere entirely. The alliance that Moscow built through arms sales and political support collapses because Soviet tanks couldn't survive American guns. The Cold War's Middle Eastern front shifts permanently. Washington gains influence Moscow spent 20 years cultivating. The M60's battlefield performance literally changed geopolitics, not through diplomacy or ideology, but through tungsten penetrators that punched through Soviet armor at ranges Egyptian crews couldn't match. Technology determined alliance. Survival demanded choosing the winning side. Sadat chose accordingly. By 1981, Egyptian M60s patrol the Sinai under different flags, crewed by soldiers who learned their predecessors' mistakes. The Soviet T-55s and T-62s that survived the war rust in depots, museum pieces commemorating the doctrine that failed. Some get sold to African nations seeking cheap armor. Others get scrapped for metal. None see combat for Egypt again. The tank battle that started on October 6, 1973 ended Egyptian-Soviet alliance, proved American technological superiority, and demonstrated that modern warfare punishes the side with inferior systems regardless of courage, training, or numerical advantage. The kill ratios told the story. The wreckage proved the point. The diplomatic realignment confirmed the lesson. Soviet confidence met American engineering in the Sinai Desert. Only one side drove home. The tank battle that changed everything.